Hi guys, here from Pax Europiana in front of the Austrian Ministry of Social Labor and other activities. It's actually the Austrian Imperial War Museum, and I always use it as my kulisse for my statement because it's a sign of the failed Austrian policy, because our policy in the 19th century was a disaster. It was built on xenophobia and on protectionism and on megalomania. This has not changed actually. And on anti-Americanism, xenophobia and anti-Semitism, by the way. And still it is very similar to that, yeah. But let's not go too general here in this beautiful morning in June 2022. I want to explain why our economic and trade and energy policy is a complete abject failure, and it's based on the wrong political assumption. It has led us into this complete disaster we are now, and it is a big problem. Let's talk shortly about energy, trade and about the Austrian geostrategic disaster. Obviously we should be in NATO. We are not in NATO. Why? Because we are xenophobes, we are anti-Americans, anti-capitalism and so on, protectionists. We are not even supporting the free trade agreement with America. That's a big problem and we should do that. But of course I'm calling for a free trade agreement with America since 30 years. Austria has blocked it. Now they're talking about a strategic partnership with America, relaunching American partnership. It's all nonsense. Austria is built on anti-Americanism. We failed in the First World War. We were on the wrong side of history in the Second World War. In the Cold War, we were somewhere in between. Bruno Kreisky, complete disaster, and continues this kind of Ostpolitik appeasement, understanding Russia, understanding all the enemies, but not understanding the friends. This is a disaster. It has led from a big empire, by the way, the biggest land power in Europe, to a very medium 9 million people. And we are just lucky to have 9 million because 1 million new Europeans from Eastern Europe have chosen our place to live, and they have renovated and they built it. Austria is still the most restrictive country in citizenship because the small elites, they want to have their long-term families to vote for them, and they are not interested to compete for the votes of the new Austrians, and so they are very restrictive, like in Kuwait and in other countries where they restrict the citizenship because they cannot control the votes of the newly arrived citizens. So I call for, you know that of course, low taxation, flat tax would be good, opening of the labor market would be good, about a pan-European labor market for all Europeans would be good. But let's focus for one moment on our failed Austrian energy policy, where we, on a treasonable and corrupt strategy since the last 20 years, while we were knowing what Putin is about since Chechnya, and Habsburg, Rübig and others have warned all so intensively, and we have entered even more dependency on Russian energy because it was cheap and it was corrupt. And the people involved got a lot of fees and money, and that is how it worked. We have consistently, since we are in the EU, worked against free trade agreements. Yeah? We have made a big mess out of the Mercosur and TTIP agreement. That means, you know, that's the trade with America, North and South. We have made a big mess about Canada even. That is unforgivable what Austria has done. But now suddenly they have now ratified it. That was good. Germany even, they have not even ratified CETA. So TTIP is very important to have a free trade agreement with America, with Mercosur, get it done. It's deflationary, it's producing prosperity, and it's a normal thing because these are our friends and not the Russians, which are our traditional enemy that even Franz Josef knew when he called them in to kill the Hungarians. Yeah? And is ever since in between. Our people, like the Upper Austrians of the generations before, were killed on the battlefield by the Russians in Przemysl and in Stalingrad and on all the battlefields. And of course in the Cold War they were our enemies as well. And that the Austrian Viennese elite has sold us out to the Russians for some gold is an absolute scandal, and it's unforgivable. And I'm happy that the protectionists who were running this country are now gradually out of power because they have lobbied against Mercosur, against TTIP, and of course against the other big important agreements which were promised. Indonesia. You don't have to be a big strategist to understand that Indonesia is a very big producer of energy and of natural resources. They always have been. And what we are doing, we are defending the Nutella lobby, whatever, you know, palm oil is so important. They even sued us on the World Trade Organization for our populist idiocy. And it's logical that we have free trade agreement. It's almost finished with Indonesia, with ASEAN. Human rights, we say then in Cambodia, yes, yeah. These are Russian allies, yeah, this Cambodia and Burma. And obviously, you know, it's a problem we have to always. I'm a human rights defender, but that we block our prosperity in Indonesia and Thailand and all this potential for world trade to be better regulated, because that's what it is, a free trade agreement. It's a joint regulatory basis for our activities to be built on. And then we block it. Shame the Austrian xenophobes, protectionists, and also anti-Semitists, anti-Americans, and anti-Semitists. Yeah, they put from time to time a flag on the, you know, because they support Israel, but they do it only to cover their sins and their bad conscience. That they have not overcome this anti-Americanism, anti-capitalism, anti-Semitism, protectionism, which is the inheritance of Hitler, which in Austria has lived on because we were not fully re-educated by the Americans like the Western Germans. And that's a big tragedy. And then their grandchildren are running this country and they always think it's good to be against Mercosur, yeah, because of the Amazonas, while they don't know that we better regulate the world with free trade agreements, because that's the export of European regulatory standards by the market access. And if that is a minister who doesn't understand, then I cannot help the people. How come they are ministers then? Yeah? It's all going completely wrong. So when it comes to energy now, what is the logic? If we have a crisis with Russian energy, obviously we should have done that a long time. Obviously conclude the free trade agreement with Azerbaijan. It's a big exporter, it's the start of the oil industry, the gas industry. Obviously everybody knows that. We don't have them, that's a big problem. Then the Gulf Cooperation Council. I was in Geneva at this World Investment Summit 3 years ago. I was already calling for that. It was ready, the treaty. But then we stopped it, of course. You know, we can always then have big issues and try to impose human rights views of Europe on Saudi Arabia. But let's not forget how we won the Cold War, by an alliance with Saudi Arabia and by them flooding the oil markets in '86. Yeah? We won the Cold War against the Soviet Union also with an alliance with against the Soviet Union with China, with communist China. That was Deng Xiaoping policy, and they have opened it, and that was very good. And we should do that again. Conclude Kai, obviously conclude it. This is very important, and we should do that absolutely, 100% we should do that. And yes, of course, we will improve human rights in Saudi Arabia and in China, but they are not hostile nations. The hostile nations are Iran and, of course, first of all, Russia and North Korea. And this we have to fight, and we have to win this battle, and we have to make sure that Ukraine wins by putting them in the EU customs union, to making clear they will join NATO, and Austria joining NATO as well, in order to remove this terrible precedents of terrible submissive neutrality, which then the Austrian neutrality advocates, not knowing that we got neutrality for unity and for removal of Russian troops, recommend neutrality for Ukraine while being partly occupied, similar like Moldova, but even much worse than obviously with the war going on. But this is absolutely submissive form of neutrality and cannot be allowed. It's an absolute disaster. And so you see consistently our kind of megalomania, anti-capitalism, anti-Semitism, xenophobia, protectionism, this kind of ideological thinking of the extremists, yeah, they are permitting the main institutions of the Austrian society, like this ministry and the political parties, and they have led to this wrong feeling that the neutrality has saved us and anti-Americanism is very good, yeah. And then we had, of course, all this kind of wild rile up against Bush. And that was the disaster. And here today we are still in this kind of trap, a very big trap Austria is imprisoned in, and then we have these consequences. Yeah? And as an EU member state, Austria has some power, because you could say it's totally irrelevant. But we have not really arrived EU institutionally in our brains and mentality, but we are still thinking in that way. And then we have this tragic kind of positions, and then we have the power to block things in Brussels, and we do. For example, nuclear energy. I'm also not in favor of nuclear energy, but I'm extremely against Russian nuclear energy. Now, for example, Mr. Nehammer, who is supposedly Austria is very much against nuclear energy, but he says nothing about Russian nuclear energy in Hungary. Who wants a strategic energy project like that, which the Finnish had a similar and they have cancelled it, and Hungary is going on with the PAX project, PAKS, look at it. It's 12 million euro project where we will be all in danger because 300 kilometers from here is a Russian-built nuclear power station. We should not rely on Russia, not in energy, not in military technology, not in nuclear technology, and also not in infrastructure. That today we have this big problem that the Black Sea is blocked and we are in this crisis is a major crisis of our failed politics the last 15 years, because that Ukraine was there, I think we knew already, and today still we don't have the infrastructure access to Moldova and to Ukraine, because we were too greedy to really substantively support Bulgaria, Romania infrastructure connectivity to build all the highways and the railways to the border with Moldova and Ukraine. It would be much easier. And of course we need now a big investment package. Again, Austria blocking, and because we are protectionist, anti-Ukrainian, pro-Russian. In the end of the day, that's the essence of our foreign policy. Schüssel very much in charge of that one still today, and he is the mastermind of all this pro-Russian policy. And he is now like being a superstar and behaving, he knows things and he knows very much his interests, yeah? And he is obviously behind much of this still today. Yes, we need an alliance with Saudi Arabia. The American president is going there now, and of course we need to convince them to pump up more oil and carbon. We need to lift our own coal resources, and we of course need also the countries who have already nuclear energy, not the ones who don't have it, but anyhow that's different. We don't need new nuclear, but we need the nuclear which is working according to European standards. And with European, and the uranium obviously from Australia and from Africa. Why don't we have a free trade agreement with Africa, with Australia and New Zealand? Yeah? Why we have 27 years after the WTO is created, we don't have all these things? Yeah? I mean, it's unacceptable. And it's because of, for example, Austrian protectionism. The Germans are less protectionist. Yeah? They understand the world market's access is very important. I mean, ultimately, this is the battle for the world market access was leading to World War I. Let's not forget it. We need a fair global trade order, and we have built it, and the EU is a major pillar of it. And then Austrian protectionists somehow, and French are the worst, you know, of course, Macron is always the worst, and he is in many ways, of course, the role model of people like Schallenberg who come in this French diplomatic tradition. And then they have, of course, this disastrous policy because they think they can somehow time up with the French against the Germans, which is completely failed strategy, Mr. Kaunitz. And still we are doing things like that. So that's a complete disaster from the energy infrastructure, from the security defense thinking. And you have to imagine that now Sweden and Finland are joining NATO, Denmark fully integrated in PESCO and the European Defense Project, and then we are in this complete situation where Austria is not even discussing all these things. Yeah? Not NATO, not basically also EU army, we are not fully in favor, only NEOs, the liberals. Yeah? So we are in that kind of situation, and you have to imagine how bad that is. In reality, it's outrageous, and that's I really wonder what is going on in the brains and ideological thinking circles of the Austrian decision makers. It is a complete confusion, ideological, confused, and also then leading to a lot of big strategic mistakes, which now in the war 2022 are all completely exposed and open for everybody to see, and still be continuing. To be honest, or to be fair, they have a little bit opened the labor market now. Yeah, that was of course, but not like Germany, which has much more opened the labor market. There's a lot of busloads of young people from the Balkans coming to Germany, bypassing Austria. Okay, over prosperity, and we stay alone here, and we are happy because the landowning rich elites are happy with themselves, and they have their kind of hay in the dry, and then they don't care for the future. Just not too many people. anyhow, the people will come anyhow, because we have luckily built Europe as an open labor market. Yeah? But their protectionism against people from Kosovo, Albania, Bosnia, Ukraine is unbelievable. It's a tragic kind of continuation of their xenophobic, anti-capitalist, anti-American traditions on which these nations is built since many, many centuries as a defense of the German people living in the East against the Slavs and Eastern Europeans. Yeah? That is the whole idea, and that is something we have to really overcome, this very negative mentality, this original sins of Austria, because Austria could be a wonderful open place, and many good Austrians are open and good. But unfortunately we have this tragic history and the dominance in politics of this disaster. Yes, and we do not apologize for starting the First World War, and we feel regret that the emperor broke. But why it broke? Because we were institutional, not flexible, no, we were not federalist, we were also ideologically stuck in a long gone past of monarchical elite, German-speaking aristocracy, again dominating a lot of people who they didn't want to share power with or responsibility. And then it all broke up in a big mess created, by the way, by the Russian and Serbian secret services, who are still today working very well together and working very much against us. And we are doing nothing to hinder them, because there's a lot of corruption here, by the way. Every month we have a big corruption scandal of somebody selling out to the Russians secrets or kind of secret data information. And then we still have this neutrality which is serving so much the Russian interest. Because they say, oh yeah, very good neutrality, oh very good, that should be what Ukraine is doing, and that is wonderful. And also for Serbia, they of course use the neutrality as a role model for themselves and justify Austria, their own kind of anti-NATO, anti-Americanism, anti-Semitism with exactly that. And anti-Semitism plays a big role as well in Ukraine, because never forget, Ukraine is ultimately, and Belarus, it's the old parley of Jewish settlement in Eastern Europe, where the medieval ages onwards they have pushed the Jews in that area, and the Russians were very anti-Semitist, and they are. And Ukraine and Poland and Belarus, this is the traditional area, the hardcore area of the Holocaust and of the fight in the First and then the Second World War. And of course it is anti-Semitism, this anti-Ukrainianism, and there's no coincidence that Zelensky is a Jewish origin and religion. And so this is exactly the same anti-Semitism of Russia and of the European middle classes, of the Catholic middle classes, which has destroyed Europe and has brought us down. And this is the exact ideological source, yeah. And this we have to overcome. It's not all people. If you say them they are anti-Semitic, they will reject it. If they say them they are anti-capitalist, yeah, that's good. But it's all the ideological thinking of this extreme past, and this is still lingering on. Yes. Trade, protectionism, tax, I have talked the labor market, the EU. Of course it's important to have NATO membership, and of course Ukraine in NATO to end this terrible war, because it's the only way to end this war is NATO membership. And if Austria also joins, then Bosnia and Kosovo can join, then Serbia is the only non-NATO country in the Balkans isolated. That should also then lead to a kind of rethinking over there, and then also to go into the direction of changing the situation in terms of having an invitation for free Ukraine without Donetsk and Lugansk district and Crimea to join NATO, and to have the NATO secured borders, and to make peace in Zaporozhye and in Kherson by intervention. Obviously we have to do that, and by liberation of the beautiful countries of by liberation of Kherson and my friends in Kherson. I always think about you. And Zaporizhzhia, Mariupol must be liberated militarily by NATO and Ukraine together, and that's so important. Yeah, I think I was clear. Most topics currently covered. Yes, thanks a lot to Finland for joining NATO. Thanks for Sweden to join. Thanks for Denmark to vote yes to joining EU security cooperation. And I think we will have more good news on the 23rd of June. I'm also active now for Romania and Bulgaria to join the Schengen zone. That would be extremely important as well. And to get things done. I think yes, we have to get things done, and more to come from Pax Europiana, and please cut off all ties with Russia, and Austria, liberate yourself from your tragic past, please, and be ready for a real European Austria. That's my hope. And clean up the mess with Russia. Come clean, join the West, fully, Austria. It's time to do that. Bye.